While we're on the app, you've got misgivings about that as well?
Yes, I have. I don't think the app is for everyone. I think people will make their own choices. As long as they make an informed choice, I don't mind whether they do or they don't download the application.
But there's not much to fear, is there?
Oh, look, it depends on your circumstances. If you're a bus driver and you get up in the morning, you drive your bus and you come home, spend some time with the wife and kids, maybe go to a sports event, I don't think you've got any problems. If you're a journalist and you regularly meet with sources and you don't want people to know who those sources are under any circumstances, you may, for the protection of those sources, decide not to download the application.
Yeah, there are some interesting aspects like that, I suppose. But my point about it, I suppose, and look, it's not foolproof. It is just one of many tools that health authorities will want to use to pin down outbreaks. But the point is just that for it to be effective, you need a lot of people to sign up to it. And I'm happy to do so because I'd like the country to open up as much as possible, as quickly as possible.
Yeah, well, that does lead to some unknowns. So we don't actually know, for example, how well the application worked in Singapore. I've asked those questions and no one's been able to give me an answer yet. But we also need to put the application into perspective. I'm one of the few politicians that has been through COVID-19. I know all about contact tracing, having spent 3 or 4 hours on the phone. And if I were had tested positive, as had occurred, and I'd had dinner with you, for example, I might have sat 2 metres away from you. The COVID contact tracer will ask questions like, did I share a bottle of wine with you? Did I pour your wine? Did you pour my wine? The application doesn't go to those sorts of details, so it's supplementary to the contact tracing process, and we must. It must make sure that we recognise that, and in some sense the Prime Minister is being a bit disingenuous in saying this is the key to reopening up. There are so many things that Australians are doing very well, things like the social isolating, that have a great effect. I think the application is being oversold.
Yeah, I think you're right there. It's just one part of the picture, but also I think for us to think of this as a one-off is a mistake. While we hope we don't see another pandemic, we've got to get all of this stuff fine-tuned because we could see another pandemic or epidemic any time, and the better we deal with them in the future, the more we learn this time, the better off we'll all be. Just on what we can do coming out of this one, Rex Patrick, this has exposed a lot of our economic vulnerability. It's exposed our lack of economic sovereignty in many ways, our reliance on overseas suppliers for crucial materials. You believe the government should be doing a lot more with its own purchasing power to support Australian manufacturing, Australian-made goods?
Yeah, look, we're going to come out of this with a number of small businesses not surviving, some major companies not surviving. We're all looking at what's happening with Virgin. The Australian government needs to have a plan that looks at things like making sure we value add, making sure we consider self-reliance in our purchases as a value proposition, making sure we diversify our supply chains. And one of the things we can do, one of the things we can add into that mix is making sure that when we purchase things that we give strong consideration to Australian companies. We're going to have an economic flat spot, perhaps close to depression. We need to make sure when we spend taxpayers' money that we direct it wherever possible at Australian entities so that we create Australian jobs, so we're investing capital here in Australia, and we're making our own supply chains much more solid.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think most Australians will nod their head and agree with you. We might even have to change some of our free trade agreements to make that possible, mightn't we?
Well, it's interesting. The Commonwealth Procurement Rules, Clause 4.7, actually contains something that is compliant with the trade agreements that we have, and that is simply an economic benefit test. And what that does is require an official to look at a tenderer or a number of tenderers and say, ask them basically themselves 3 questions. How many jobs are created by this proposal in Australia? What is the capital investment? What does it do to our supply chains? Then it doesn't matter whether it's a German, French, Australian, US company. The question is, how much economic benefit are you contributing to by your offer to the Australian government? And indeed, That does in itself give Australian companies an advantage because they tend to have a footprint here already. They understand the IR rules. They understand what the capital market here is in Australia. So it subtly gives Australian companies an advantage, but most importantly, it makes sure that when officials are considering who wins a tender, they're looking very closely at what is the economic benefit for Australia in awarding this contract to that particular supplier.
Yeah, good stuff. Makes a lot of sense. Thanks for joining us, Rex.
Thank you.